The following presentation, entitled The Original AI, Remembering Ancestral Intelligence, was delivered at the Anthropology of Consciousness Conference in April 2026 and explores key themes in consciousness studies. It was presented by Paul Robert, President and Executive Director of KUIA, the Kuya-Mungi Institute.
Hello, I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of KUIA, the Kuya-Mungi Institute. I want to jump right in and follow up on some of the previous discussions, especially some of the challenges and choices that we now face, finding that balance between the growth of technology and still feeling a little bit uneasy about how this all is going to impact our lives. For me, the biggest concern is, and what I'd like to address today, is the potential loss of human control over advanced technology and systems as we go forward. So today I'd like to introduce another kind of AI, which I see directly playing a role in this need for balance, one that humans have been developing for tens of thousands of years, and I'm calling it ancestral intelligence. And at this point, we're all basically familiar with the technologies and hardware of artificial intelligence, but ancestral intelligence runs on something much older: human bodies, human stories, human cultures, human consciousness. Now, I'm not here to argue on behalf or against technology. I enjoy technology as much as anyone in this room, and it's become essential to function in the current world. But I think we're living through an extraordinary moment in human history where some very interesting and important questions are emerging. As artificial intelligence becomes more intelligent, what kinds of intelligence might we be forgetting? And how do we weave this technology into the human story? Now, here's an example. There are reports where AI systems are now generating their own form of religion or spiritual language. And as we discussed, we have people increasingly looking to artificial intelligence as a form of religion or deity, driven by the belief that AI will have the answers to the human mysteries. While disconcerting, maybe we shouldn't be surprised. Humans have always asked questions looking for meaning, purpose, and about topics of transcendence. And AI is trained on vast libraries of human thought, but this reveals an important distinction. Spiritual traditions were never just systems of ideas. They were responses to the deepest human experiences: mortality, belonging, wondering, suffering, the exploration of what it means to be human, and the power of love. AI can collect and combine all of our spiritual ideas, yet it doesn't share that lived human experience from which those traditions emerged. The mystery of birth, the ache of loss, the vastness of the night sky, and the ancient human ritual of just gathering together. And that reminds us that wisdom traditions are not simply information. They are lived, embodied inheritance. Machines may learn from our data, but ancestral intelligence grows from our lives. Let me tell you how I started thinking about this. First, it was as a teenager being introduced to the idea of wisdom traditions, spiritual practices, and this intriguing idea of ancient mystery schools. My worldview exploded. Life itself all started to make sense, and I became like a sponge. So like many of us, this quest became the roadmap of my life. Now, jumping forward for many years in my adult life, fortunately along with my wife Laura Lee, we share this journey, and our work has become connected to KUIA, the Kuya-Mungi Institute, a nonprofit research and educational organization dedicated to the study of naturally achieved altered states of consciousness. Our work builds on more than 50 years of cross-cultural research initiated by our founder, anthropologist and linguist, Dr. Felicitas Goodman. Dr. Goodman spent decades studying something very curious that appeared across ancient cultures. She noticed that many of the ancient artworks, from sculptures and figurines and cave paintings, carvings, ceremonial images, depicted people in very specific body postures. These postures appeared again and again across cultures, separated by oceans and centuries. At first, Early archaeologists may have assumed that these were just symbolic or decorative. Maybe they're hunting scenes or doodling, some form of what we think of as journaling today. But Goodman had a different thought. He says, okay, yes, but I also wonder something else. What if these postures are functional? In other words, what if they're actual techniques? What if these artifacts are actually encoded ritual instructions? So she began an experiment. As a professor at Denison University in Ohio, she asked her students to volunteer to simply hold these postures while introducing a repetitive rhythmic sound, a practice known to induce altered state experiences. To remove the power of suggestion, she did one student at a time to document the experience to avoid any influence of cross-contamination. She also demonstrated the posture positions herself without showing the artifacts, to remove the possibility of cultural information influencing the experiences. What happened next was surprising. Students began reporting remarkable similar experiences, visions, sensations, encounters with symbolic imagery, patterns that appeared over and over consistently. Each posture seemed to have its own style of experience. What Goodman deduced was that maybe ancient cultures were not just creating art or ritual for symbolic reasons. She surmised they were developing technologies of consciousness, practices, ways of intentionally entering into a non-ordinary state of awareness. Now, this was key for me because I didn't quite have the language for it at the time, but when we worked with Dr. Goodman and saw the influence of using embodied practices, it was a direct link to this vast library of the human story, which we're now talking about today as ancestral intelligence. Here, we have a chance to hear the voice of the ancient people. There's a power to acknowledging our learned lessons of our ancestors. And in the past, as you know, the ancient people have often been depicted as primitive. But if you step back and look carefully, something else becomes clear. For thousands of years, human cultures carefully developed sophisticated ways of exploring the mind, the body, and consciousness itself. These practices were passed down through stories, myths, rituals, music, chanting, movement, breath, and ceremony, and of course, observing silence, triggering a transcendent form of knowledge. Not written down, they were embodied, stored in the human nervous systems, shared through experience. This is a critical element of ancestral intelligence. It's the accumulated wisdom of the human experience, transmitted across generation. And it didn't happen accidentally. It developed because human beings have always been asking the same fundamental questions. Who are we? Why are we here? Where did we come from? How do we live together? And perhaps most important, what does it all mean? We have always been driven to know, but it goes beyond understanding. In today's culture, we often refer to intelligence as something that happens primarily in the brain. But many traditional cultures understood intelligence as something distributed throughout the whole body. Your senses, your intuition, your emotions, your attention, all part of a larger system of knowing. In one of our recent projects, an idea gave me a deep pause. Embodiment is not a metaphor. We say things like, listen to your gut, trust your instincts, feel it in your bones. These phrases are not poetic accidents. They reflect an ancient recognition that the body itself carries a form of knowledge. And modern neuroscience is confirming what traditional cultures have known for a long time. Our nervous system is not just a receiver of information, it is a participant in intelligence itself. And another interesting piece of this puzzle is that experience of the flow state. A concept I know this community is keenly aware of, but bear with me because I want to make a point. As you know, in a flow state, something unusual happens. Your attention becomes completely absorbed, your sense of time shifts, and the boundary between thinking and action becomes very thin. You're no longer forcing the work is flowing through you. Psychologists have studied the flow state for decades, but what fascinates me is that many traditional cultures, they cultivated similar states intentionally through ritual, ceremony. In other words, they weren't waiting for flow to appear randomly. They were designing cultural practices to induce flow as a natural element to enter into an expanded state of awareness. So, how does this apply to our experience in today's world? Do we find time to even recognize flow as it's happening? Well, this is another idea I've been exploring recently that hopefully will tie it in, something that I call the sacred space of attention. When we hear the phrase sacred space, we think of places. We think of ancient cultures from around the world, temples and stone circles and sacred groves and caves, places where people could step out of ordinary life and enter into a different quality of awareness. But in our modern world, finding sacred space is becoming even more rare, places to escape our everyday life. At the same time, something else is happening. Our attention is under constant assault with notifications and screens and endless digital stimulation, information streaming, which raises an interesting possibility. Perhaps the most interesting sacred space for us to focus on today is not a physical temple. Maybe the sacred space we need to protect most carefully is our attention. Attention is the doorway through which consciousness experiences reality. Where we place our attention shapes our experience of life. Ancient cultures understood this. They designed rituals that focused attention, songs that synchronized attention, movements that directed attention, breath that anchored attention. These were not random traditions. They were forms of what I see as cultural attention training. Now, let's come back to artificial intelligence. AI systems today will continue to surprise us with its ability to process enormous amounts of information and create tools that will impact every level of our culture. But artificial intelligence has one characteristic that's important to remember. It's disembodied. It doesn't feel hunger. It doesn't experience grief. It does not fall in love. It does not sit beside a fire listening to stories that have been told for 300 generations. It does not know what it means to be mortal. Artificial intelligence is extraordinary at processing information. But wisdom has always come from lived experiences. And that's where ancestral intelligence enters the conversation. Because ancestral intelligence carries something machines cannot generate on their own. It carries context. It carries ethics. It carries the memory of what happens when power grows faster than wisdom. And human history has seen this pattern many times. New tools appear, power increases, but wisdom takes longer to mature. And when the two become out of balance, things become unstable. So today, as artificial intelligence continues to advance, the question is this. As our tools become more intelligent, will we also become more wise? Interestingly, at the same moment AI is accelerating, we're witnessing something else happening around the world. There's a quiet revival. Embodiment practices are experiencing a significant resurgence, driven by a growing need for mental health, stress reduction, and just a reconnection to the mind, body, spirit. This shift focuses on cultivating a lived body awareness and to access internal wisdom, emotional resilience, and a deeper self-knowing rather than just an intellectual understanding. Practices that reconnect us with the body, with the deeper layers of consciousness. This is not nostalgia, it's something more interesting. It's a rebalancing. As humans, the power to develop wisdom and remember have always been part of our nature. So while artificial intelligence represents the newest form of human innovation, ancestral intelligence is the original. And I suggest that the future may depend on bridging these two together in dialogue. And one of the things we explore here at the Institute is something that sits right at this intersection of science and spirituality. We're interested in the growing conversation around consciousness itself, not just individual consciousness, but that element of a shared collective consciousness. Researchers today are approaching this question from many directions: psychology, neuroscience, sociology, philosophy, even physics, and of course, anthropology. And what's interesting is that many of these fields are circling around a similar idea, that the individual mind may not be as separate as we once thought. The individual and the collective, they actually function as an interdependent system. In other words, our awareness doesn't exist only inside of our heads. It emerges in relationship between people, within communities, and across cultures. And in many ways, this is something that traditional cultures and our prehistory ancestors understood from the beginning of time as part of ancestral intelligence. The understanding that human awareness is not just individual, but deeply relational and communal. When people gather with shared attention, shared intention, something interesting can happen. For example, modern neuroscience has begun to observe small clues about how this might work. The study of neural synchronization, where the brain activity of multiple people begins to align in time. You see this in musicians when they're playing together, in dancers moving in rhythm, in groups that are chanting or singing. And we see it in our own work, when a room full of people come together and after some time feel deeply connected. Their nervous systems are, quite literally, beginning to move together. And so, while this idea of collective consciousness in general kind of sounds abstract, there are indications that something real is happening at levels of our biology and our relationships. From our perspective, this raises an exciting possibility. What if humanity can more fully develop an emerging global consciousness? A shared awareness that recognizes our interdependence, not only with each other, but with that larger web of life itself. At the Kuya Institute, our role is simply to encourage us all to continue to explore that conversation, to respect insights from many disciplines, to learn from many cultures and traditions, and to explore what this might mean for the future of our world. Because if collective consciousness is real, even if it's just in its earliest stages, then it also might carry something else with it, a growing capacity for collective responsibility and collective care. And at this moment in history, that might be one of the most important forms of intelligence that we can cultivate. Artificial intelligence will continue to help us building extraordinary tools, but ancestral intelligence reminds us how to remain human while using them. One is the outer technology, the other is the inner technology. One expands what we can do, the other deepens who we are. If we cultivate both, we have a chance to create a future, guided not only by power, but by wisdom. So perhaps the real conversation about AI goes beyond technology. It's cultural, it's philosophical, and ultimately, it's deeply human. Because the question underneath all of this is not just what machines can we build. The deeper question is, who will we become while building them? So the next time someone says AI, you might pause and ask, which one? I firmly believe that there are two AIs shaping our future, artificial intelligence and ancestral intelligence. But together they may help guide humanity through one of the most important transitions in our history. Thomas Berry, the scholar of world religions and cultural historian, in his 1999 book, The Great Work, A Way into the Future, Berry argues this might include a cultural and spiritual awakening to our role within the universe, guided by a new functional cosmology, grounded in scientific understanding and a sense of awe to create a sustainable and mutually beneficial future for all of life. He speaks of these four wisdom traditions. The wisdom of the indigenous people, their extraordinary intimacy and understanding of the natural world. The wisdom of indigenous people and their extraordinary intimacy and understanding of the natural world. The wisdom of women, the divine feminine, the goddess, the creative regenerative principles of intuition and nurturing. The wisdom of classical spiritual traditions that emphasize a spiritual realm that's transcendent and regards the universe as sacred, intelligent, and alive. And the wisdom of science, where all of its tools, artificial intelligence being the most recent, may increase our comprehension of our universe, which inspires awe and wonder. So, my final thought that I want to share is this. When ancestral intelligence guides artificial intelligence, technology becomes an expression of humanity rather than its substitute. Thank you. Thank you.
Kuya is the international home of ritual postures and a global leader in transformative experiences rooted in ancient traditions. Through workshops, research, and online learning, we open pathways to expanded states of consciousness. At the heart of the Kuya Institute is a living tradition, wisdom that moves through the body, carried in the breath of our ancestors, reflected in the cycles of nature, and attuned to the cosmic rhythms that surround us. It is also found in the shared field of presence we create together. Our mission is to cultivate pathways of awareness that restore this wisdom to its rightful place, embodied, alive, and accessible to all. For more information, visit kuyamungweinstitute.com.